So when we talk about reproduction, we have to talk about reproduction in plants and reproduction in humans. So we're going to go ahead and first talk about reproduction in plants, and then we'll discuss the humans. So when we're going to talk about it, there are generally two types of reproduction. We have asexual reproduction and we have sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when there is only one parent, okay? There is only one parent and the offspring is going to be genetically identical. What do we mean by that? We mean by that the offspring is going to be completely an exact copy of the parent. So whatever the parent is going to be like, whatever is going to be the genetic makeup of the parent, the offspring is going to have the exact same genetic makeup. There will be no difference, no change whatsoever, right? Since this is happening with one parent, okay? Asexual reproduction involves one parent. That is why there is no involvement of any gametes. Gametes are basically your sex cells. So there is no involvement of any gametes. Without the usage of gametes or without the involvement of gametes, asexual reproduction will take place. This sort of reproduction is seen commonly in your single cell organism. For example, bacteria. Bacteria have the ability where they can reproduce asexually. So just one parent is there and that bacteria can simply divide into two, right? And what can happen that they can end up dividing into two. Now, because there is no involvement of any gametes, no involvement of, any fertilization, because of that, in asexual reproduction is generally faster, right? So your bacteria, for example, they can divide every 20 minutes. And that is why the bacteria can be so dangerous when it comes to causing diseases because of how fast they can divide, right? So every 20 minutes, the bacteria can divide into two cells. So we have asexual reproduction in single cell organisms or in bacteria. We also see asexual reproduction in plants, right? For example, we have our fungi. Okay? Fungi can produce both sexually and asexually. In asexual method, they reproduce by using spores. Okay. So what happens? They produce these spores and these spores are often dispersed by air. The air will carry these spores away, and when these spores are going to land on a suitable ground, suitable soil, the spores will start to divide and they will end up giving you a new plant altogether. Okay. Hyphae is the name of the branches of fungi. The branches of fungi are known as hyphae. And mycelium is another terminology for fungi. So they will make new branches and they will end up developing into a proper fungi. Okay. So one of the examples that can happen is your fungi. Your fungi can produce asexually, right? This is what it looks like. So this is basically over here. These are your branches. Okay. This is the fungi over here. This is the mycelium. This is the hyphae. And at the end of the hyphae, you have your spores. When the air is going to blow, these spores are going to be dispersed and they're going to land on the soil. When they're going to land on a suitable soil with suitable weather conditions, the spore will start to divide and it will start to produce another fungi. So that is an example of asexual reproduction. So I told you plants undergo asexual reproduction. So one of the ways I've already discussed, that is your fungi. Now, another ways by which plants reproduce asexually is vegetative propagation. And this is a very important method that you need to know about. Okay. Vegetative propagation is basically, let me go ahead and tell you what actually happens in the process. Let me give you a rough idea. Okay. So once again, we will only have one parent plant. So there will be no pollination, no cross-pollination, nothing like that. There will be no pollination at all. Simply what is going to happen, this is your plant. This plant is going to start to develop something known as lateral bud. Okay, lateral bud. It will start to develop these extensions that are known as lateral bud. What happens that this lateral bud starts to grow and it ends up growing and growing and growing until it reaches a suitable soil. When it reaches the suitable soil, the lateral bud will basically start to grow. The lateral bud will implant over here. The lateral bud will implant on the soil, and from the lateral bud, roots are going to start to grow. From the lateral bud, shoots are going to start to grow, and a new plant will be made. Once the new plant is made, this lateral bud will simply fall away, and the new plant is going to continue to grow up to be an adult plant. This is a general idea. We will study this in a bit more detail. But this is vegetative propagation, right? Because it is propagating, it is reproducing without using any pollens, without using any gametes, without sexual reproduction. It is basically undergoing, it is basically reproducing. So this is going to be vegetative propagation, right? So vegetative propagation results from the growth of a lateral bud on a stem. Okay. So this bud, lateral bud, is going to continue to make a branch, and then it will continue growing until it makes a complete plant with roots, stems, and leaf. Okay, when the lateral bud is going to die, the new plant will now be independent of the parent that produced it. This is the general concept of vegetative propagation. Okay, so the lateral bud will be close to or under the soil. So generally the lateral bud will grow close to the soil or under the soil. Okay, and then it is basically going to grow, and what is it going to do? Instead of, it is going to keep on growing until it reaches the soil. When it reaches the soil, it will start to make roots, stems, and leaf, and the new plant will start to grow. Once the new plant starts to grow, the lateral bud will fall away, it will die away, and now the new plant is going to be completely independent. So this is actually what vegetative propagation is. Making sense so far?
Yes, miss.
Now, okay, good. Now, when we are going to talk about it, different plants have different ways of vegetative propagation. Okay. For example, you have plants which are known as solons and rhizomes. Okay. Let me go ahead and tell you about them. Okay. So basically, when you're going to talk about it, stolons and rhizomes are just types of plant. Okay, they're just types of plant. That's it. So when you talk about flowering plants that are, for example, a strawberry plant. Okay, strawberry plant is a flowering plant, or a buttercup plant is a flowering plant. Okay, so generally when flowering plants like strawberry or buttercup, these plants are generally very short. Okay, and most of the plant can actually be found below the ground. So these sort of plants that are very short, and majority of the plant is actually located below the ground. So in these situations, the stems are known as rootstocks. Okay, if you look over here, look, it is so small and bulky. Generally, the stem of the plants are so long, right? But what happens that certain plants like strawberry plant or your buttercup plant, they have really short stems. These short stems are known as rootstock. Majority of the plant is found under the ground, and they have really short stems. They're hardly above the ground, only a little bit above the ground, and these stems are known as rootstocks. Rootstocks will give leaves and flower. After the rootstock has flowered, after the rootstock has produced flowers, the lateral buds will produce long shoots which grow horizontally over the ground. The lateral buds, so after they have produced the flower, look over here. After the flowers have been produced by the rootstock, lateral buds will start to grow horizontally over the ground. These shoots are known as stolons or runners. This lateral bud, when it is growing horizontally over the ground, this lateral bud is known as a runner or a stolon, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And generally, what is the structure of the stolon? What is the structure of the lateral bud? They have nodes and internode. Okay. What is node? Node is where you have a bud that can produce shoot and roots. So that part of the stolon or that part of the lateral bud that has the ability to make shoot and roots and make a complete plant, that part is known as a node. The region between the nodes, is known as internode. So your stolons have nodes and internodes. Node is the region that will actually enter the soil, produce your root, produce your shoot, and give you a complete plant. While the shoots are growing and while the roots are growing, the plant will receive nutrition from the parent plant. So the parent plant will send nutrition to this particular new plant with the help of the lateral part, with the help of the stolon. It will go ahead and give the nutrition to the new growing plant. Once the new growing plant is grown enough that it can now make its own food, the stolon is going to dry up. It is going to dry up and it's going to break down. And the daughter plant is now going to be independent and ready to do its own growth and reproduce by vegetative propagation. So this was about the stolon plant. Stolon plants like these, which have really small stalks. Then we have some plants that are known as rhizomes. Rhizomes and stolons are the same. There is just one difference. The difference comes in the location of the lateral bud. Okay, in this, the lateral bud is growing over the soil. In rhizomes, the lateral bud grows under the soil. Okay, so they have the same process that you get a lateral bud, and from that lateral bud you have nodes and internodes, and the plant grows from the nodes. Okay, the difference between over here is that the lateral bud is going to be underground. So when the lateral bud is going to be underground, we are going to call that lateral bud rhizome. So when it's over the ground, we call it stolon or runner. When it is under the ground, we're going to call it a rhizome. And just like the stolon, you will have nodes, and where you will have nodes, you will get your buds, and from there, you're going to produce your roots and your shoots, and eventually the rhizome will die away and the plant is going to become independent. So this is how the process is going to take place in your stolons and in your rhizomes. Any confusion so far?
No, miss.
Monami, any confusion?
No, miss.
Okay. Then we have something that is, then we have another type of plants. Okay. These type of plants are known as bulbs. So bulbs, how are they different and how do they actually work? So for example, you can see this is an onion plant, right? So onion plant is an example of a bulb. Okay. So when we are going to talk about it, bulbs are very short shoots. They have really short shoots. In fact, the stem is only a few millimeters long and the leaves around the stem are thick and fleshy with stored food. Where is the stored food? In the leaves. Okay, so take a look at this. This is an onion. This onion, when you're taking a look into it, or not, don't think of this as an onion. Forget I said it's an onion. Just think of this as a flower bulb. Okay, this is the bulb of a flower. Look how small your stem is. Look at the stem. It is so small, so much smaller compared to your stolons and rhizomes as well. They had a small stem. They have an even smaller stem that is only a few millimeters. And they're surrounded by these thick fleshy leaves. These are all leaves. This is a leaf, this is a leaf. And the leaf is where the food is actually going to be stored. Okay. Now, over here, the process of growth is related to seasons. Okay, so we have to talk in relation to what will happen in summer, what will happen in spring, what will happen in winter. So in spring, the stored food is used by the rapidly growing terminal bud. What is the terminal bud? This bud that you see over here, this is the terminal bud. The terminal bud is that bud that is actually going to grow and give you the flower. So the leaves will open up and the terminal bud will grow and it will actually give you your flower. Okay, so that is the terminal bud. So the terminal bud, it is spring. The bud wants to grow. The bud wants to produce a flower. So what is it going to do? It is quickly going to use the stored food. Whatever food is stored in the leaves, it's quickly going to use it up. So it can end up growing and it can end up, turning into a flower. Once it turns into a flower, once the leaves are open, what is going to happen? So you go from spring to summer. When you are going to go from spring to summer, do I have a diagram? Okay. When you go from spring to summer, what is going to end up happening? That when you're going to go to summer, now the process of photosynthesis will be start, right? So what is going to happen? The photosynthesis has started. The leaves are open. Food will be made in the leaves. The food will be made in the leaves and it will be stored. Okay, it will be stored. Then what will happen? That the leaf bases will swell up because they're storing food. So the leaves are going to swell up and they will make a new bulb that will grow next year. So now let's say that spring, summer, in the summer, they made the new leaves, they made a new bulb, and then it went to again next year, which is now again next spring. So in next spring, now these leaves are going to start to give food to the bulb and the bulb will grow to give you another flower. So that is generally what happens, another way of vegetative propagation, right? So over here, you also have a vegetative propagation also happens with the help of a lateral bud. Okay, so this is generally just growth of the plant. Everything I told you about, that is the growth of the plant, the same plant growing. So in spring, the growing bud, terminal bud, is going to use up the food in the leaves and it's going to grow into your flower and the leaves are going to open up. During the growing season, that is generally summer, food is going to be made in the leaves and it is going to be stored inside the leaves. The leaves are going to swell up and a new bulb is going to be made for growing next year. So next year, the new bulb will give you another flower. Now, what if this plant wants to reproduce? What if this plant wants to reproduce and make offspring? Vegetative propagation will occur. And vegetative propagation, what happens? Some of the food is sent to the lateral bud. So all of the food is not stored in the leaves. Some of the food is going to be given to the lateral bulb. The lateral bulb will grow inside the parent plant and next year, then the lateral bud will grow just like this. Just like this, the lateral bud will grow and it will give you another plant. Okay, so this is what I'm looking. This is the beginning of the season. Okay, this, look over here. This is the flowering bud. Okay, this flowering bud is going to grow and it's going to give you flowers and it's going to give you new leaves. Where will it get energy for it to grow? From the leaf bases. The leaf base is going to have the energy needed for it to go ahead and for it to grow. Okay, Now, when you're going to take a look into it, what is going to end up happening? The leaf is going to, your flower is going to grow, leaves are going to open, photosynthesis will occur. Because of that, food will be made, and that food is going to be stored in the leaves. This is the next year's terminal bud that will grow to give you another flower. Over here, what is going to happen? This is the lateral bud. So when you want to do vegetative propagation, what will happen? Some of the food will be sent to the lateral bud. So instead of sending all of it to the leaves for storage, it will be sent to the lateral bud. That lateral bud is going to grow. And when the next year is going to occur, this lateral bud is then going to give you your, is going to go ahead and it is going to give you your new plant. So this is how you get vegetative propagation in your bulbs, in plants that are known as bulbs. That is how you see vegetative propagation. Now, there is another sort of a plant that you need to know about. We need to know about stem tubers. What are stem tubers? Let me give you a very common example, potatoes, right? Potatoes are stem tubers. So how do potatoes grow? How do your stem tubers grow? Your potatoes also have lateral buds. Lateral buds at the base of the potato shoot produced rhizomes. So this is going to be happening underground because potato is present underground, right? So what is going to happen? Look, this is your potato shoot, okay? So this potato shoot is going to go ahead and this potato shoot is going to produce lateral buds. This lateral bud is going to go ahead and it is going to extend downwards under the soil. See over here? So when it is under the soil, we call it a rhizome. So this lateral bud is going to travel under the soil and it's going to turn into a rhizome. After it is going to turn into a rhizome, what will happen? The rhizome will swell up because of the starch, that is being stored inside the potato, inside the rhizome will swell up and it will form tubers. Okay, it will form a potato, it will form a tuber. Now, these tubers are a part of the stem, right? They are a part of the stem. See, this is the lateral bud growing over here. So if this is a lateral bud growing, so the lateral bud is a part of the stem. So it's the lateral bud has gone underground and turned into a rhizome. So this is a part of the stem. Since it has a part of the stem, the tuber or the potato also have buds on it, right? And if we leave the potato in the ground, or if we take out the potato and put it somewhere else, the buds on the potato will give us shoots and the potato will start to grow, right? So that we know this, if I give you a potato and you plant it in the soil, you will get a potato plant. What will happen? That the lateral bud of the potato shoot becomes a rhizome. It goes under the soil and it swells up because of the stored starch. That stored starch is going to form a potato or a tuber. We will take that tuber and we can put that tuber into another area, or we can leave the tuber over there to grow. As a result, what's going to happen? The late buds inside the tuber, they will start to grow shoots. They will start to make shoots using the food in the potato. So inside the potato, you have stored starch. So using that starch, the buds will start to grow and you will get a new potato plant. So that is known as vegetative propagation, right? All clear? So when we talk about propagation, vegetative propagation is a natural process. It happens naturally. Now, what you and I can do is we can do artificial propagation, where we can artificially make a plant grow. So there are multiple ways of doing it. Okay. One of the ways of doing it is that a natural process, where, for example, I am taking a potato and I'm planting it in the soil. That is artificial propagation because I am doing it, but it is still natural because it is happening biologically or it is happening normally, right? But we can also go ahead and use different methods, scientific methods that do not occur naturally in a plant's life. So there are two methods for artificial propagation. One of them is by taking cuttings and the other one is by tissue culture. Let me go ahead and tell you. So tissue culture, what is tissue culture? So one of them is taking cuttings. Taking cuttings is pretty simple. You're simply taking the cutting of a plant, and then after taking the cutting of a plant, you're using that to grow another plant. Then you can do something known as tissue culture. Tissue culture, what happens that what we can do is that in laboratory, we can take a single plant cell and we can stimulate the plant cell to divide and grow into a complete plant. How can we do that? One thing you and I can do is we can take a small piece of plant tissue from the root or the stem, it is up to you. Take a small piece of plant tissue and you treat it with certain enzymes to separate it into individual cells. So you take a small tiny little piece and you put enzymes on it. Those enzymes will allow the cells of the plant to separate from each other. Once the cells are separate from each other, we can give particular plant hormones, right? We have special plant hormones. These plant hormones can then cause cell division, stimulate cell division. So the cells start to divide and form roots, stems, and leaves. So that is one way. This is known as tissue culture. Okay. This is one way by which we can make a plant artificially. Another way we can make a plant artificially is that we take a small piece of the plant and we put it in a nutrient jelly. So we have this sort of jellies which have got nutrients in it that are needed for the plants to grow. When we do a little bit of our microbiology, you guys will look it over there as well. Cells in the tissue. So what will happen that you have put it in a nutrient jelly. So the nutrient jelly is providing nutrition. So the cells in the tissue will start to divide and they will start to produce many cells. And as they will start to divide and they will produce many cells, you will see that the small piece of tissue will turn into a shapeless mass, a shapeless sort of a thingy. That is known as a callus. And if we take this shapeless mass, if we take this callus and we give it the required hormones, it will keep on dividing until it turns into a complete plant. So this is artificial propagation, right? This is artificial propagation because we are going to go ahead and we are going to be artificially growing plants inside the laboratory. So this is what is artificial propagation. Now, when we talk about our asexual reproduction, this is primarily what we had to talk about in asexual reproduction. Now that we are done with talking about asexual reproduction, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction, right? What is the good thing about it? What is the bad thing about it? Some of the good things, bad things about it, or some of these things might be a bit harder to understand right now, but later on when we do variation and biodiversity, all those topics are coming up, it will become a bit easier. But generally, what is the advantage? Let's talk about the advantages first. No mate is needed. Only one parent is good enough, right? Reproduction affects the ability of a species to survive, right? So that is one thing as well. If the mates are not available, a species will not be able to reproduce and it reduces their chances of survival. In asexual reproduction, mates are simply not needed. You have a single parent is more than enough to produce offspring. No gametes are needed, right? So later on when we will do sexual reproduction, we'll talk about pollination. So the problems with pollination, you need to get the pollen across to the other flower so that fertilization can occur and all those things can happen. But over here, gametes are not needed. You don't need any pollinization. Another advantage, all the good characteristics of the parent are passed on. All the desirable characteristics. So let's say you have like this really good strawberry plant, right? And it produces these really juicy, sweet strawberries. So all of those good, desirable things that you like about this plant, that, oh, it produces these big, juicy strawberries, they will get passed on to the offspring. So you retain the desirable characteristics, right? And another advantage is that where there is no dispersal. So generally, when you talk about dispersal, we will talk about later when we do flowering plants, but dispersal depends upon either insects or wind, right? If you talk about pollen, the wind has to blow the pollen and the pollen will spread out and it will go into different areas. So vegetative propagation generally does not involve any dispersal, generally. Okay, so what happens that where the parent plant is, so imagine you have a strawberry plant or imagine you have a potato plant. That potato plant is already in a very good soil, it is in a very good environment and it is growing really, really well, right? It is happy, the soil is favorable, the wind is favorable, the everything is favorable, environment is favorable, the plant is growing well. The offspring or the potato tuber, it's going to stay where it is, right? It's going to stay in the same soil. So it will be in the same favorable condition, right? When you are going to talk about pollination, for example, so let's say you're producing pollen, right? That pollen is spreading to different areas. There is a possibility that the pollen can fall down in an area where the conditions are not suitable. So it might not be able to grow. With asexual reproduction, this is reduced because they are going to be in the same favorable environment as the parent. So the environment will not change. They will be in the same environment. They'll be able to grow. That is one advantage. Another advantage is plants that reproduce asexually can store large amounts of food, like the potato. It can store large amounts of food in its over in the potato. That is why in the your potato, when you take a look, talk about it in winters, the potato plant is able to serve what will happen, the leaves and all will fall off, but the plant will stay because the food is stored inside the potato. Then when the spring is going to come, the plant can use the starch stored inside the potato and it can grow. This over here, the leaf bases in our bulbs, they were also storing food. So asexual reproduction allows the storage of food that allows rapid growth of the plant when conditions are suitable. These are the advantages of asexual reproduction. Let's talk about disadvantages, right? Disadvantage, first of all, is, so one of the good things we said is that all of the desirable characteristics of the parent are passed on to the offspring. This was an advantage. But this at the same time has another problem. The reason that you were getting all of the desirable characteristics is because the children or the offspring were direct copies of the parents, right? So what will happen over here? They are direct copies. There is very little variation between the parent and the children. Why is this bad? Why is it bad that we don't have any variation? Two reasons. First of all, the good characteristic will pass on to the offspring. You're right. But the bad characteristics will also pass on to the offspring. Okay, so you have a juicy, nice strawberry plant, but let's say that the strawberry was sour. The offspring will give you exact similar characteristics. So first of all, that is one particular problem. Let's say that the parent plant did not have resistance to a particular disease. The children will also not end up with any resistance to the disease because they're identical copies. That is one problem with lack of variation. Another problem with lack of variation is that why is variation good? Because variation increases our chances of adapting to a different environment. Let's say that the environment suddenly changed. The environment suddenly changed. If the environment suddenly changed, these plants will not be able to survive because they cannot adapt, because they are identical copies of each other. When you have variation, when you have sexual reproduction, you can have variation. The genes can be different, right? The genes between the parent and the offspring can be different. So offspring can end up developing changes. It can end up developing some changes that can allow it to survive the environment. So let's say the environment has changed. The offspring can develop mutations. The offspring can develop, can have a variation in the genetic information that gives it features that allow it to survive the new environment, right? So variation allows you to adapt to a changing environment and increases the survival of a species. This is evolution. That is what evolution is, that you are changing to adapt to a changing environment. So without variation, that will not happen. Another major disadvantage of the entire process is the lack of dispersal. The lack of dispersal, I told you, was good because the offspring will grow in the same area as their parent and they will have favorable environment to grow. But since they're growing in the same area as their parent, there will also be competition. Because imagine that you get a lot of strawberry plants in the same area, they will all start to compete with each other. They will start to fight with each other for nutrients, water, light, because all of these things are limited. As a result, there's going to be competition between the plants, which can reduce the chances of the plant surviving. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of asexual reproduction. Is everything clear? Does anybody have any questions?
Miss, could you explain the tissue culture once again?
Yes. So when you talk about tissue culture, there are two techniques that you can use for tissue culture. The first technique is when you take a small piece of the plant. After taking it, you put enzymes on the plant. You take a small piece of plant and then you add enzymes on it. The enzymes will break down the plant tissue so that the plant cells will be separate. The enzymes will break down that plant tissue so the cells can be separate. Once you have separated the cells from each other, you can give the plant growth hormones. There are special hormones, specific hormones. You can give those hormones to the plant cells and the plant cells will start to divide and they will make root, stems, leaves, and basically they will keep on dividing until they can make a new plant. This is one way of tissue culture. Another way of tissue culture is you take a small piece of tissue, but you don't break it down. You don't give enzymes to it. You don't break it down. Instead, you put it on a piece of nutrient jelly. So what will happen when it will be on the piece of a nutrient jelly, when it will be inside the nutrient jelly, the plant tissue will start to grow. The cells inside the plant tissue will start to divide. It will grow and it will turn into this shapeless mass. This shapeless mass is known as a callus. Okay. So it will keep on dividing. The plant tissue will keep on dividing on the nutrient jelly until it turns into a callus. Once we have this callus, then we will treat it with hormones. Then we will give it the appropriate plant growth hormones so that it can start to grow roots and shoots and stems and leaves, and it can grow into a new plant. So two methods. One is where you take the tissue, you treat it with enzyme so that all the plant cells will separate away, break away from each other, and then you give it the hormones. The second way is that you take a piece of tissue and you put it on a nutrient jelly. The nutrient jelly will make the plant tissue divide. The cells in the plant tissue divide and it will end up giving you a shapeless mass we call callus. Then we will treat the callus with hormones and we will get a complete plant. Making sense now? Is this clear now?
Yes, miss.
Okay. So this is how you go ahead and do. This was all we had to do related to asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction, you only have to study in plants. Okay. Because when you talk about humans, humans only reproduce sexually. So we are done now with the topic of asexual reproduction. Now we have to start talking about sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction we have to do first related to plants, and then we will cover the topic in humans or in animals. So when we are going to talk about, first of all, let's talk about what is sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction involves the formation of gametes. Okay, you need to have your gametes. Gametes are your sex cells, right? And basically, why do we have gametes? Let me explain this to you. By the way, the gametes are produced by reproductive organs. The reproductive organs will make these gametes, the sex cells, and this will happen by the process of cell division, which is known as meiosis. We have two ways or two processes by which the cells can divide. You can have mitosis and you can have meiosis. Don't worry about them right now. We have a whole chapter to cover, which will specifically talk about these two processes. So when we do that topic, I will explain to you guys what is mitosis and I explain to you what is meiosis. Okay. So generally what is going to happen that when you're going to talk about it, you need to have these sex cells. Let me just give you a little bit of an idea about these gametes. So generally when you talk about our DNA inside the nucleus is found in the form of chromosomes, right? So when the cell is about to divide, the DNA has to condense. The DNA has to wrap around itself and it has to end up forming these chromosomes. Okay, so chromosomes carry genetic information. They carry the DNA that is needed for the cell. Now, when we talk about these chromosomes, generally the number of chromosomes or the pair of chromosomes is fixed. Okay, so for in humans, we have, for example, 46 chromosomes. Now, when you talk about gametes or sex cells, how are they different from the other cells in the body? They will have only 23 chromosomes, half the number. They will only have half the number of chromosomes, right? For the term we use for it is haploid. Your 46 chromosomes are found within the gametes, within the normal cells of the body, and this is known as diploid. The term we use to describe such cells are diploid cells. They have the total number of chromosomes. Haploid cells have half the number of chromosomes. So your gametes have half the number of chromosomes. Why do they have half the number of chromosomes? Because when they will fuse with each other, this is coming from the mother, this is coming from the father. When they will fuse with each other, when they will combine with each other, what will happen? The cell that will be formed, it will have 46 chromosomes. So that is why we need the gametes to have half the number of chromosomes. So that when they fuse together, when they join together, the cell that will be made, it will have the complete number of chromosomes, right? If you had 46 over here and 46 over here, you would get double the normal number of chromosomes. That's not what we want. We want the number of chromosomes to remain the same. So that is what gametes are. These are your gametes. This is how gametes are different from your other cells. Okay. So gametes are made in the reproductive organs, and this is made by meiosis. There are two processes, meiosis and mitosis. Okay. So I will explain to you what the methods are when we do the topic, but the method used to make gametes is known as meiosis. So what is going to happen? You have a male gamete and you have a female gamete. When the male gamete and the female gamete will fuse together, what is going to end up happening? That they are going to end up giving you one single cell. That one single cell is known as a zygote. So when the male gamete and the female gamete will fuse with each other, when they will combine with each other, you will end up with one single cell, which is known as a zygote. Then the zygote will divide and it will grow into a new plant or a new human or whatever. Okay. Now, let's talk about these gametes and the reproductive organs. Flowering plants. In flowering plants, the male gametes are your pollen grains. Pollen grains have male gametes inside of them. And the female gametes are known as egg cells. Okay. The female gametes are known as egg cells and they're found in the ovules. Okay, so I will tell you who makes the pollen grains. When I tell you the parts of the plant, I will tell you who makes the pollen grains. But in flowering plants, the male gametes are found on the pollen grains and the female gametes that are known as egg cells, they're found in the ovules. And I will show you these parts of the plant, don't worry. In animals, the male gamete is your sperm and female gamete is the egg. We will talk about these later as well when we do reproduction in humans. So let's first talk about the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction. The advantage of sexual reproduction is that the offspring is different compared to the parent. There is variation in the offspring. Now, why does this happen? Why is it that you get variation in the offspring? Why are the offspring different compared to the parents? One of the reasons is because you are fusing two gametes, right? One gamete is coming from the mother, the other one is coming from the father. So half of the genetic information is coming from the mother and half of the genetic information is coming from the father. So when they will fuse with each other, you will end up with a new combination, a different combination of chromosomes compared to the parent, because now it is a mixture of both of the parents. On top of that, when you're talking about your chromosomes, right? So one thing that happens in your gametes, one thing that happens when your gametes are being formed is that the combination of chromosomes in the gametes are different. For example, the sperm cells, each sperm is going to have a different combination of chromosomes. We have a total of 23 chromosomes in one sperm cell. So let's say that I'll give you guys an example, okay? Let's say that there are only 4 chromosomes, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. One is known as chromosome number 1, one is known as chromosome number 2, 3, and 4. Now, we have to divide these. We have to go ahead and we have to make the gametes using these chromosomes, okay? So one gamete can get chromosome number 1 and chromosome number 2. The other one can get chromosome number 3, chromosome number 4. Another gamete can get chromosome number 2 and chromosome number 3. Another one can get chromosome number 1, chromosome number 4. Right? Another gamete can, so this you can see how the combination of chromosomes is being changed. So when you are making the gametes, when you're dividing the chromosomes into 2, the chromosomes can be in different combinations. It is not necessary that all the gametes will get the same number of they will get the same number, the same type of chromosome, because you have different chromosomes, right? So the combination of chromosomes can also vary. So this also increases variation. So first of all, you're already mixing 2 cells together. So you're getting a mixture of 2 genetic information. On top of that, each gamete, so when I talk about, for example, egg cells, every egg cell is going to can have a different combination of chromosomes, which further increases variation, right? So this variation is good. Why is it good? Because then there's a chance that the offspring can inherit a feature, or they can inherit a particular a mutation or a particular trait that will allow them to adapt to a changing environment, right? So this is basically the advantage of sexual reproduction, okay? Another advantage of sexual reproduction is that new varieties can be created, right? For example, you guys are dealing with, you are a sort of a crop grower, okay? You are you're making your crops, and the problem is that your crops are just, they are just they are not resistant to a particular disease. Every year the disease comes and it sort of damages your crops, and you're not happy. So what you can do is, since the crop you're growing reproduces by sexual reproduction, you can go ahead and you can find a plant, or you can find a type of the plant that has the resistance to the disease. And then you can take the genes, or you can take the seeds of that crop and bring it to your crop, or pollinate with your crop, or fertilize with your crops. So when your crops will get their offspring, those offsprings will have resistance to that particular disease. So you have created a new variety of your crops. These have the resistance to the disease. So you can do that because of sexual reproduction, because you can actually take the genetic information of another plant and incorporate it into the offspring. Then another advantage of sexual reproduction, especially in relation to plants, I'm not talking about in humans, okay? In plants, what happens that when seeds are produced, so generally in plants, when sexual reproduction will happen, you get your seeds. These seeds need to be dispersed. They need to be spread around so they can, go onto the soil and they can start to grow. So generally what happens is that when the seeds are being dispersed, when the seeds are being spread, they're usually carried away from the parent. And since they're carried away from the parent, they will grow away from the parent, and that will reduce competition, because now the parent plant and the offspring are far away from each other. So that will reduce competition. They will have their own water, their own nutrition, more nutrition available, more water available, more sunlight available. So there will be less competition. So they will be able to survive much better. But what are the disadvantages? Okay, one disadvantage is that you need two parents. Okay, in humans you definitely need two parents. In plants that is not true. Some plants can self-pollinate. Some plants have both male parts and female parts, so they can self-pollinate, right? But generally, even for plants, when you have plants that do cross-pollination, that is from one plant to another, then in those situations, you need to have two parents, right? That is one problem. The second problem is that the growth of the new plant to maturity from a seed is slow. That seed will have to germinate. Then the plant will start to grow. Then the plant is going to, turn into a mature plant. That takes time. That is a slow process. In sexual reproduction, that is a faster process, right? Asexual reproduction is a faster process because the plant is simply growing from the node and the parent is providing the nutrition so the plant can grow. In sexual reproduction, you're starting from a seed. The process for the plant to come out of the seed, to grow from the seed, and to actually become mature takes a lot more time. So that is a slower process. Along with that, another disadvantage that you can have is that your seed, I told you that seeds are being dispersed, right? So one possibility is that the seeds can end up in unfavorable environment. They can end up in a soil that does not allow them to grow. So as a result, the seed will not be able to grow and the plant will not be able to grow. That is another possible disadvantage of sexual reproduction, right? So this is basically the advantages and disadvantages related to sexual reproduction. Any confusion? Does anybody want to ask anything so far? Guys, is everything clear?
Yes.
Is this all clear? No confusion so far?
Yes, miss.
No, miss.
Okay. So guys, we're going to go ahead and stop it over here for today. So basically we have covered the topic of asexual reproduction is complete. We have started sexual reproduction. So we have done introduction to sexual reproduction. Now we have to talk about our flowering plants. Inside the plants, we have to talk about flowering plants. Before we can talk about how the sexual reproduction takes place, we will have to talk about the parts of the plant. We will first have to understand the parts of the plant, and then when we are done, we can go ahead and actually talk about pollination. And after pollination, we have to go ahead and talk about how the fertilization actually occurs. So we are going to go, that is what we have to cover inside the plants, and then we can move on to humans. So we're not going to start the new topic, this topic right now, because this topic is long. So we're going to go ahead and stop it over here for today. And in the next class, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by talking about the flowering plants. Okay.
All right, Miss.